Welcome to Lowe Connects, Alec Trimino stitching the gap in conversation with Lance Fung. My name is Jody Seifer. I'm the Curator of Education at the Lowe Art Museum, and I'm delighted to have you with us for this program. And I'm very excited to hear from both of our speakers about this fabulous project. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn the reins over to our guests. If you need the closed captioning, you can click on the box that says live transcript or CC in your Zoom menu bar. And we invite you during the program to type in questions for both Alex Trimino and Lance Fung in either the Q&A or the chat. It's your choice, and we will do our best to answer the questions at the end. And also, when you close the webinar, when you leave the webinar after the program, a survey will pop up, and we greatly appreciate it if you take a few moments to fill it out and let us know your thoughts about the program. It helps us to provide feedback to our generous funders and donors, and also our staff really reads them and takes the feedback into account. Also want to let everyone know that next Wednesday, October 26th, we're having another great webinar at 6:30 that I hope you will join us for. You can use your phone and the QR code right now and sign up for it. It's Dustin Yellen. Civilization is a Sculpture. So he's a wonderful artist as well, and I hope you can join us. And if you don't want to register now, you can visit our website later, lowe.miami.edu, and just click on events calendar and click on the 26th, and you can register for that. All right, so I want to talk about this project. This is Alex Trimino's installation, Stitching the Gap, is part of Lowe Creative Projects, which is site-specific installations emerging and mid-career artists that were invited to foster creativity and experimentation. One of the benefits of activating this space, which for those of you that are local is in the very front of the museum, is that the art can be seen by everyone, both the day and night, if you're passing by or whether you're visiting. The public can also view the progression of each installation, inviting them into a process that is more typically hidden. So Alex Trimino is the inaugural artist in this space, which we're really excited about. Stitching the Gap, it's on view in person until January 29th of 2023. It will be followed by Wendy Wisher from February 2023 until May 2023, and then Sandra Ramos from June 2023 until September 2023. And this project was made possible by the Linnie E. Dahlback Memorial Foundation, with additional support provided by the State of Florida, Department of State, Division of Arts and Culture, the Florida Council on Arts and Culture, the National Endowment of the Arts, the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs and the Cultural Affairs Council, Miami-Dade Mayor and Board of County Commissioners, the City of Coral Gables, Bow Arts Miami, the Lowe membership, and Oolite Arts. So now I would like to introduce our distinguished guests. Alex Trimino was born in Colombia and lives and works here in Miami. She graduated with an MFA from FIU. She attended the Oxbow Artist Residency affiliated with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and is a recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Scholarship for Visual Artists. She has been a recipient of many grant awards. Not going to read this whole thing, but you can read it for you, from the Frost Art Museum, the Elliott Museum, the Appleton Museum of Art, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, and she's represented by the Diana Lowenstein Gallery in Miami. Lance Fung is the curator of the project space, and he is a curator of Fung Collaboratives out of California. He was the curator who conceived Illuminate Coral Gables, a wonderful project that we all know locally here. And he is currently working on the first exhibition curated for the G20 Summit, which opens in November in Bali. So without further ado, I will turn the reins over to Alex and Lance.
Thank you, Jody. Nice to see everybody. Nice to see Alex. We are both super excited to share with you some of the insight and vision of an incredible artist, Alex Trimino, today. I just wanted to start out with how this all began, right? So a number of years ago, when I was working on Illuminate, I was doing research on artists from the region to include into Illuminate. And Alex was one of the artists that myself and John Talley and Rosie Gordon-Wallace went to do a studio visit. And I just wanted to share with everyone, including Alex, how much she impressed us when we went into her studio. The space was inviting, she was welcoming, it was very casual and relaxed, but professional. And right in front of us were her works, some finished and some in progress. They completely blew me away. I saw the value of her work, and then we sat down, and then she started to share a lot of the intellectual merit behind her work, which is what we hope to kind of unveil today. Ever since then, we started working on a large-scale outdoor project. And now we're thrilled because of Lowe's new project space that we're able to put to good use some funding that she received to create a new work, and hopefully everyone will be able to go and see it. It's really, really remarkable. So that's sort of my background with Alex. We text and email all the time, and it really is a complete joy from my end of working with an artist who is passionate, who's knowledgeable, who's also practical, and is able to see in spaces the beauty, or what could be beauty, as she transforms them through her art. So I'm going to lob the first question. And for everybody, we have 3 questions that we've thought through so that we could really help to chip away at this really dynamic and diverse artist and her practice. So the first question is an easy one, but also very interesting for a lot of younger artists and local people, of course. Since your work is often site-specific, would you please share some of the challenges and advantages of envisioning and realizing a new installation in the Lowe project room? I personally feel your work transformed this former reading meeting space into a proper exhibition space. And we are thrilled for the Lowe to be providing a new type of exhibition, site-specific commissions to their audience. And also this space is focusing on Miami-based artists. So if you could share a little bit of your insight in how you experienced the space when it actually had furniture and no walls built and whatnot.
Yes. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you because you've been amazing throughout this project, and it would not have been able, we would not be doing it without you. You've been amazing, keeping track of everything, and it's been such a pleasure working with you. And of course, I wanted to thank the Lowe Art Museum. So I think it's amazing to have a space where local artists can show, and so visible from, and I'll show you pictures shortly. It's a space that's visible from the outside, from the inside. You really can see it at night, even when the museum is closed. So it's an amazing space. So let me share my screen.
Right.
There. Okay.
It's not quite sharing yet.
It's not sharing. Okay, so share there.
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just listed there the dates of the project, and I really wanted to thank, of course, Lance and Lowe Art Museum for allowing this project to happen, and State of Florida, Department of State, Division of Arts and Culture, the Florida Council for the Arts. They were really like the main source for sponsoring this project. It was amazing. And of course, we had support from Ulite Arts and many other supporters that I listed there. So I just wanted to thank everybody. It's been great working with everyone. And I wanted to show you a picture of when I started. I came to visit. It's not a very good picture, but I came to visit the space, and it was a reading room. And this is inside the lobby, and you can see that it's a glass room. So it's glass to the outside, glass to the lobby. There's practically no walls, and the space is quite tall. And there was this beam, kind of like 80s architecture, but I thought, okay, this is the beam that I'm gonna have to work with, because it's like a place where the pieces can lean. There was no option of attaching anything to the ceiling or to the floor, really. So I thought, okay, the pieces are gonna lean, and that's how the whole process started. Like, you know, seeing the space, it's really an amazing space, because it's small, but it is tall. It's a very high ceiling, and this beam cuts the space in half. So this was like first sketches of the space, and then of course we did renderings to make sure like what the size of the tubes would have to be. These are more renderings just to figure out what the angles would be, and all those little things have to be taken into consideration, like, you know, the thickness of the tube and how long it is and what's the angle, and it's all this like technical stuff that can be a little bit boring, but it makes the installation happen. Like if you don't pay attention to all those things, it doesn't happen. So all those little things were important. So this is a picture. Oops, this is a picture of my studio. More renderings with measurements, sketches. And here's when we start really installing. So it was like a long process, you know, from the first visit to the museum to when I really started installing. And then it took about 3 days of assembling pieces in the floor. Those were like sketches at the side, tape of what goes where, like everything had a place. And here is the testing, like all the stuff you don't see when you come to see the show. This is all the behind the scenes, you know, the nitty gritty. All the power supplies, how they're going to be attached, what's going to be attached to what, testing everything before it goes up. And this is the pieces start going up. And at first we thought we were going to be able to have a lift in the space, because the pieces are 18 feet high. It's 18 tubes, 18 feet high. But the room is small. It's tall, but it's small. So there was no way to get a lift inside. So everything was with a ladder, and it was kind of like zigzagging through the installation to be able to get all the pieces inside. The pieces had to be assembled outside, brought into the room at an angle. So it was a fun installation. I love challenges. So this was challenging, and I loved it. And here's the installation coming together. That's practically done at night. So this is from outside, which is something wonderful about this space, that, you know, even when the museum is closed, you drive by, you can see the installation that's on at night. You can see it as you walk into the lobby. So, and it was interesting to see students taking pictures at night, interested in the process of what was going on. That was like really great to see, because usually you're installing in a space that's closed, you know, kind of like the white cube. And this kind of like opens up to the outside without really opening up. So that was really great. There's more pictures of the installation.
So I have a question while you're showing those. Does your studio have as tall a ceiling? Did you like fabricate it in your studio? I know you had to mark everything and make it transportable. I know the work is also designed so that it could be shown indoors, but also outdoors should another outdoor light festival take place, which we are hoping to bring it to an exhibition I'm working on in California. So it's amazing. It's an indoor outdoor piece. But were you able to actually see it yourself fully executed before it went into boxes and transported and reinstalled?
Actually, my studio, there was several things. So I'm using a different type of lighting material in these pieces because it's going to be used outdoors after. So I'm using a new product. It's a neon LED. And neon LED before only had 180-degree view, which is great for anyone that wants to replace a fluorescent tube, but not great for me because I need 360 degrees. So this is a brand new product that I was very excited to use. And the problem is it's quite sticky. So I couldn't fill the tubes in my studio because of dust. So I had to fill the tubes in my house, clean everything, clean the floor, make sure there was no dust, and put the LED neon inside the tubes. In my studio, there's an area that's tall, but I wasn't able to get the pieces up. So I actually had to take them outdoors. And I wish I had a picture here. I forgot to add that picture. I leaned them against an old tree that I have outside to be able to see like how it would work and determine the angles, like how far away from the beam I could move the base and still be okay. The piece not bowing too much, working. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of challenges, but it all worked out.
Great. I mean, I know we're going through sort of the practical bean counting stuff, which is quite, honestly, at least for my students who are watching, super interesting. People don't realize we've been working on this for about 1.5 years, almost 2. Yes. And it's not that large a space, but it fills it. I mean, this certainly could fill the rotunda of the Guggenheim if we wanted to, right? Yeah. But I remember when we were working with the technical staff and they were talking about making sure that the elements were secure, so that if someone with a smaller child, you know, accidentally bumped into one of the sculptural elements, how would you ensure that it wouldn't kind of slide or fall upon itself? Obviously, they're attached together up top, but that's when that incredible aesthetic element all around the base of these individual light poles emerge. So, you know, you might want to share how you have to work on the fly. And in this case, you had to work on the fly a lot, right? Where could you plug it in and what have you? But wouldn't you say that sometimes those physical, financial parameters pushes your creative process? Or was it all one giant pain in the neck?
No, I mean, I really love having a challenge. The biggest challenge, I think it's more fun, you know, it takes you to a new place. Like, how do I get them to stay up? You know, now we have a carpet floor. You can't really attach to a carpet floor. The beam is concrete and the top was wood. So if you really look up close, there's like little hooks that I put there that you can actually see them. Let me go back for a second. You see those little things here on the boards. That's how they're attaching. So these boards are up on the beam. I had them prepared before getting to the Lowe. So they would attach on the top, and then the poles, the totems would be zip tied to these little brackets, right? And then to ensure that there was some weight at the bottom, I had to use weights, cement, and then they're all covered. You know, the bases are all covered, but there was cement and weights inside, just making sure, and also carpet tape holding everything in place. Yeah.
Well, I know for sure when we get to the third question, because I know the audience really wants to learn about the deeper meaning behind some of your materiality, you can share more about the details of these bases. So when visitors go in to see the show for the first time or again, then they're able to look at it more closely and have more of the artist's intent behind it. But really, I remember those discussions, and it iterated into an end result that I think is stronger aesthetically and conceptually. I'm going to keep moving along, if I may, and ask you a second question, because this is another one that comes up time and time again when I teach or when I lecture around the country, or just when I meet artists for the first time in their studio. So my question slash thought is when I often speak with artists from around the country in doing studio visits or whatnot, one common issue that comes up for local artists is the difficulty for them to show in local museums. This is one reason why I think when I approached Jill and she instantly said, this is a great idea. We're kind of thinking about something like this anyway. So now let's really iterate it to see if and how we could collaborate together with this series of 6 artists for the new to be named Lowe Project Art Space. I know they're working on the name of that. This opportunity is huge. So I would like you to share a little bit of your process of moving to Miami, studying in Miami, starting as a young artist in Miami, and then often in that mid-career sort of period of an artist process, it's a little tougher to show locally and with museums. And then if the artist is fortunate enough to make it over the hump, then of course, then the offers come to show locally because everyone wants to really show their prized artist who happens to reside in their local town. But it is really an effort, it seems like, hearing from other artists and showing locally, and certainly here in the Bay Area, museum spaces showing local artists are almost non-existent, which is a shame all around. And so I think this opportunity that the Lowe Art Museum is offering is personally fantastic. But would you like to share from your personal perspective of the decades of pounding the pavement and learning your craft to now exhibiting?
Yes. So yeah, definitely. Let me just move along here. These are like some pictures of the exhibition. But yeah, I guess we can stop the share screen here. Here, okay. So, I mean, I love Miami. Miami, you know, it's my town. I wasn't born here, but I love it. It's in my veins. The light, the people, everything. I love it. And yes, you know, I think museums do tend to show more of artists from outside. But as an artist, it's so great to be able to show locally because you finally get, you know, all your friends and an art crowd that's been following your work for some time and collectors to be able to see the work in person, go into the installation, interact, you know, walk inside. And that's one thing, you know, like here, it's very different, you know, in a picture, which is usually what you end up sharing when you have shows outside. You end up sharing, you know, through social media, pictures of the show here and the show there, but it is very different to experience it in person. Like I look at the work and I take a picture, and no matter how great picture it is, it's not the same as seeing the pieces there, being able to, your eye adjusts to seeing the light and seeing the crochet and the knitting and all these other things, you know. But let me show you some, like, you know, a little bit of the history of the work. These are, which I thought I was not going to be able to find, these are some pictures of my early work, like early light tubes. They were mainly hanging, all straight. I was using fluorescent tubes because fluorescent tubes is what was available. You know, I was taking apart the studio lights and taking apart the kitchen lights. And that's what I was using. And then this is my MFA show when I graduated at the Frost Museum. So there I was starting to use neon and the neon came from the need to turn, like for the pieces not to be so linear. And that's when I started using the neon, you know, but still covered with the crochet and the knitting. This was a challenging exhibition because the Frost Museum has wood floors that you're not allowed to touch, like you're not allowed to do anything to it. And then they have these structures in the ceiling that you can see there, so you can't attach to the ceiling either. So I had to create this like spider web out of aluminum that would attach to the wall and then attach to some of the pieces that had bases, so some of the other pieces could hang from it. And it was very exciting to have that challenge. That it was almost like, how am I gonna make it happen here? This is how it looked at the end, and everything that was like ballast and transformers, everything was visible. And I enjoy that because it's really part of the piece, you know, it doesn't light up by magic. So all that was there. And this was another show, you know, the work kept changing. So I'm kind of like taking you through a quick visual of like how the pieces changed. This was at a show in Sweden, at a museum in Sweden, a solo show. This was Hollywood Art Cultural Center. And also this show, some of these pieces were shown at the Art Center of South Florida, which I think now is called Ulite, right? But my studio was there for some time. So that was a show I had there. This was at Mocha. And here I was incorporating shadows into the pieces. So it was like, they kept evolving. This was at Orlando Museum of Art. These are some details during stay here in Miami. I had my studio there for a year. This was the Ruth Fung Center for Textile Arts in Melbourne, Florida, which unfortunately they had to close, so they're not open anymore. But it was a great space, amazing collection that they would allow you to incorporate in some way to the show. It was really great. So yeah, that more or less gives you an idea of like, you know, the work as it evolves, but it's definitely like amazing to be able to show here locally and not show just one piece, you know, but a project room, a solo show where somebody can really go in and interact with the piece and go inside, walk under the piece, walk around.
Great. You know, you might want to end the share screen for a second. What's interesting, or not, it's okay, because I know we have more slides to show. What's great, even for me, because I haven't looked at your earlier work in some time now, is to see the evolution. And so it's subtle, but there's this movement moving forward. And I very much like this more cleaner, minimal place of where you're currently landing. I love the fact that your materiality is more eco-friendly. So you've shifted to a low energy use of the LED neon tubing kind of as your core. I think that's super clever. It's also great. It can be outdoors and it could be recycled and it's not toxic and all of those other things. But what's interesting is looking at your earlier work, it has a sort of funky rawness to it that I really like. Like I see, having worked with two artists a great deal, was Christian Boltanski and all of his electrical chords with his wall-based work. And then of course, Namjoon Paik, where it was unapologetically there, chords and cables, and it allowed people sort of this funky, crafty access to looking at the work. And now to see where your work is sort of shifting to a different direction, that was really kind of exciting. So that we remain on time and we have enough time for the viewers to ask questions, I'm going to go into the third question. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. That's a long one. I wrote a long one here, but it's interesting for me. And I think it's one of the things that impacted me. One of my lectures for one of my grad classes, we're inviting curators to speak to the class, is to have the conversation from curator or gallery perspectives of what impacts us when we walk through the door for the first time, what resonates, what makes us want to engage further and dig deeper and build a relationship before we all rip off the Band-Aid and take a leap of faith to work together. So again, I remember the first visit as if it were yesterday. Honestly, like I can feel it. And I'm going to digress a bit back to your second question. You're 100% right. No matter all the work that we do together, coming up with plans, we know the work backwards and forwards. Experiencing the work firsthand is so different than looking at it virtually. The artist's job is to deliver an object that is visual, it's relevant, it's thought-provoking, but most importantly, when you go to a museum, you should have an experience. And then by leaving with having had an experience, it will ruminate with you, and then it might transform how you think or feel for a minute or for a day or for a year, right? So yes, opportunities to show locally are huge. And I'm happy that I think this is your first time of showing at the Lowe Art Museum, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So a super great opportunity. Going back to when I first saw your work, it brought to mind many associations. And at the time, not Boltanski and Paik, who Namjoon was like my biggest mentor. But what I saw in it at that time was a movement I was super vested in, because my boss, Holly Solomon of Holly Solomon Gallery, was really the founder of the pattern and decoration movement from the 80s. That movement, of course, it's having a bit of a resurgence now, which I think is wonderful. Many artists of both genders embrace this movement, but it's a very short-lived movement, because I think the sort of typical, once it hits pinnacle, it fell prey to that typical art world male critique of materiality and judgment, right? So the artists involved with pattern decoration, we're not looking at work in the way that I think you initially were and are, and that's gender and inclusivity and equity, and a longer history of community sort of form to make art, and also art with a social justice element to it, right? There's a deeper connection to one's work. They were really looking at it formally regarding pattern and aesthetics, right? Why can't art be beautiful? Because they were working in reaction to the minimal and conceptual art movements. So instantly when I went and I saw your work, I saw two things. I saw the structure of the form, and I saw a relationship to minimalism of Solowit and Dan Flavin, which would be an obvious, very easy target for association. But then for me, I also saw Tommy Lanigan-Schmidt, Robert Kushner, and all of the P&D artists. And we have had many, many long conversations about it. For you to share of what I feel of how your work elevates that discourse to a very relevant pitch of inclusivity in tradition, in storytelling, and passing on memories through your knittings, through color, through vibrancy. And ultimately, I think you create, for me, work that is beautiful, it's interactive, but it's packed full of joy and a sense of discovery. So when you enter your artwork in general, whether it's a discrete work or a larger installational work, such as the one at the Lowe Art Museum, it's almost as if, for me, I'm entering a Rothko painting, right? But I would love for you to speak specifically to what, unlike in current times, hopefully, the use of yarn means or meant, or how you are really taking power with the material that is typically shifted over across the street from the MoMA when the Craft Museum was there, right? That 53rd Street was a great barrier from high art to low art. Very few artists could bridge. I remember when I was working with Kiki Smith, and she was bridging through some work that she was doing in glass, and she often works with textiles and printmaking and all sorts of things. Even within the MoMA, there's a hierarchy based on department, right? So I'd love for you to talk about how you've thrown caution to the wind and you are using materials that make sense for you.
Okay, let me share my screen.
It's like an MFA thesis question. Tell me about your use of material.
No, it's a very, I love the question because I think it's very important. So let me share here the screen so I can show you So here I have a picture of the Wayu. So I'm from Colombia. And here are the Wayu doing their weavings, and they do these geometric patterns, right? The Wayu believed that it was a spider that taught the first woman how to do the weaving. And only women do the weaving. And they believe that these geometric patterns are a story of the universe. I thought it was so interesting, like hearing all these stories, right? But at the same time, when I was growing up, I was rejecting everything that had to do with knitting, crocheting, embroidery, because I thought, okay, you know, that's just like cooking. That's like a domestic thing that's going to tie me to this type of life, right? But the more I was working with the, I guess, the technological part, you know, the lighting, and I always been inclined to breaking things, putting things apart. So the more I would go there, the more I would keep thinking about the crocheting and the knitting, that there was something there, right? And I started mixing the two, thinking that I was just maybe contrasting, you know, the high art, low art, technology and craft. But the work really came together when I realized that there was no contrasting. They're exactly at the same level. So all these women that were, you know, crocheting in the kitchen table, and women have been creating, you know, for a long time, but their creations were homemade. They were also practical. They were used at home and exhibit at home too, right? But we would disregard that as a craft, not high art. But once you try to understand the geometry behind algorithms that you use to program some of these microcontrollers, you realize that the best way to understand algorithms, hyperbolic geometry, is through crocheting. Mm-hmm. So all these women that were, you know, crocheting at the kitchen table were understanding hyperbolic geometry at a very intuitive level. And then there's this art historian that, I mean, like these are some details of the work. There's this art historian that I have a big connection to, is a very old art historian, Regal, you know, and he would argue that the creative urge it manifests itself not only in high art, but in the most humble artifact. So that urge to create is not a need to imitate, but it's a need to create, and it comes from your relationship to your world. So more or less, you know, everything that we see, everything has some type of influence in us, right? So this is where I'm growing up. I'm growing up in Colombia, where this is a tradition, and these are the stories I'm hearing. And of course, all that comes together. And the whole idea of putting crocheting, knitting as a craft, I think it's something, it comes from a need from the West to classify art, right? And I think as long as you do things that you're doing because it comes natural, it's how you see it, how you feel it, how you're creating, it comes together in the right way. And I think that's one of the reasons that I have this like great connection to Regal. Let me show you some other pieces. Like these are details of neon covered in yarn.
And while you share these, can you also share with the audience where you get the knittings? If you make them, I know you mentioned they're donated, so each of them have sort of this precious memory. It's like someone's lace, when they make a lace collar, it's very personal. You can kind of share a bit about that too.
Yeah, so initially I got a lot of things from my family. A lot of the, you know, the crocheting, blankets, things that were like family heirlooms, and they would give them to me. I don't get that many from my family anymore because they know I cut everything up. So I get them now from friends and, actually people that come to the shows and they tell me like, oh, I have this, Afghan that it was my grandfather's and it was important to me, but it's actually in a closet. No one uses it. I would love for you to use it. So I keep track and I keep things and I put little notes and I store them. So whenever they're used in one piece or another, I can let the person know if they're around to come and see it. And so there's this bit of history. Also, when I try to connect, sometimes it's a matter of putting things apart. In order for them to work, I have to just put them apart and then just use the yarn. Or connecting different pieces. So when I'm connecting different pieces, I try to think of what they were, the importance, the history, the story behind. And I think back of the tribes and the Wayu, and I try to use patterns that kind of like relate to the Wayu, relate to something, relate to that history, relate to where I'm from. This is the piece, and this is working in the studio with that piece. So there's all these different types of materials, and they have like, personal stories to it.
But not all of the donated knittings are from people from Colombia, correct?
No.
Yeah. And see, for me, what's interesting is two things with the use of your yarn. One, it talks about that disparity and that judgment of gender. When we went to Ireland for the first time, because my husband wanted to see where his people came from, we learned how the nets, which are meticulously made in a mathematical process, were done by the men, I believe. But then the women were the ones who were knitting those very elaborate family patterns into those big Irish sweaters, right? And what I like about the use of your yarn is it seems to transform time and also culture. And it also bridges between art and craft. You're seeing that high-low kind of quality. And one way I think it's very much similar to Doris Salcedo's work, where she really understands and values craft, artisanship, right? How to make a piece of furniture, how to craft something in a refined way, but then sort of debunks it by deconstructing it and turning it into something else, a different purpose, something called art. Yeah. And so I'm happy to hear. I thought we had talked about it before that because you're going to get a package from me of some yarn-based things to hopefully inspire you.
I love that.
Yeah.
So this piece, it's like the box drawer where you just keep little pieces that are left from every project, and at the end, it ends up being this like whole knot of like you can't use anything, everything is in a knot, but every single piece comes from some other piece. Every single piece of yarn that's in that big knot has a story and has a history. So in that piece I decided to put them all together.
And the palette you use is so joyful. It's just so effulgent. You'll probably get lots of blacks from me. So that might be a different darker piece or an accent. But we don't want to be remiss of not letting the people who are watching ask a couple questions in the last 15 minutes that we have. So I think if you don't mind, if you want to end the share screen, yes, so that Jody can jump in and then help post some questions. And since hopefully a lot of the viewers are local, and so is Alex, I really hope that you will reach out to her through her website or her gallery. You'll continue to learn and see more of her work. And the show up at the Lowe just opened, right? It's up through the rest of the year and into January. So by all means, go in. I'm sure, I don't mean to volunteer Alex's time because I know she's busy making art and also teaching, but I'm sure she would love to answer your questions or potentially even do a walkthrough. For sure. But let's hear some questions because I know, Jody, hopefully this has inspired someone out there to have a question for Alex.
Thank you both so much. It's been so wonderful to hear about your work and the progression and all the long and hard conversations and planning you've had. I do want to mention that on November 5th, Saturday, we're having a family art workshop where adults and child of any age are welcome to come and create art. And Alex has promised to be there. It's from 10 to 11:30. And I know that our membership department is working with Alex to organize a possible studio visit. And yes, she is very accessible and you should come. And I've loved your comment, Lance, about experiencing a work of art in person and having an experience. And it certainly is an experience to walk through and around and into the piece. I'm curious to know, Alex, about the pink sort of plastic shapes that are in between some of the tubes and seem to be a recurring pattern or shape in your work. Do they have a meaning?
They come from tracings of different stumps, tree stumps.
Tree stumps. Okay. See, I had no idea. And what is it about the tree stumps that
It's some, I've used some tree stumps as bases on some of the pieces, and I kind of like try to have a little bit of a history of other work in the next piece, kind of like, I don't know, like a picture, it becomes like a picture of something I used before, a little bit more of a story that's added to this piece. Like I don't want to let go of the tree stump, but I can use the tree stump in this piece, so it gets that silhouette of the top of the tree stump.
Oh,
I
great.
love it. I love how it's like the genetics. It's sort of like having a child, so it continues. But I
Yeah.
also love just how that bright pink piece of plexiglass cut catches a light, right? So we know, like with just commercial signage, if you just have a piece of plexi and an LED, it pops in a different way. So I think it also lends itself to go from this organic inspiration to a super inorganic outcome. Very interesting.
Yeah. So people want to know more technical, more about the materials. It's just what people are interested in. So they want to know, how are you attaching the yarn and the knittings and the crochet?
How am I attaching them? Well, the lighting goes inside a plexi tube, so I actually have to knit with circular needles, so it becomes a circular thing. Sometimes I cut things and then I tie them up and they become kind of like a sock, a sock that you put on the tube. So most of it is knitting, and then there is the crocheting at the end. The crocheting is usually like how it finishes, but it depends on the piece. Some pieces have more crochet, some other pieces have more knitting.
So you're literally sliding it on like a sock after you put the neon in the tube, or you're knitting around it? I don't knit or crochet, so I excuse my ignorance.
So it's kind of like a watercolor painting where you have to work backwards. I have to work backwards. I have to think what's going to go on the tube, and then I have to dress the tube, and I have to think about how I'm going to wire the tube before I cut the tube. So sometimes the tube has to be wired before, then it has to be dressed, then the lighting goes in. But everything has to be done knowing that is not really going to be fully assembled until it's on site. So it's really like thinking of the final product and working backwards.
I love how you say you're dressing it. That's great. Somebody wants to know about the bases of your work. You started to talk about a little, I think, and then got sidetracked. Why do you use them and what do they mean? The question is.
Well, I mean, there's always that need to ground the piece, even if there was no need for support, there's always this need, unless they're hanging, but there's some need to like ground the piece if it's coming down to the floor. And here it also came from the practical need to have something, some weight, right? So if somebody bumps into it, the piece is not just going to move, but it will stay there. So I'm actually using flagpole holders inside, because those can be adjusted to different angles. Then there's cement donuts that you put with your sprinkler system, so to make sure the lawnmower doesn't cut it. Yeah, so.
It's very Miami of you.
And then there's the weights, you know, like this regular weights that you put to lift weights that go inside. And then the tube goes in, and then there's protection for the plexi tube, and there's this all this other stuff that has to be ready. Also protection for the lighting. So it's getting the pieces up. It's really, you know, it's a process. I was like so nervous. I always get very nervous when the pieces are going up, making sure everything works. Somebody's holding the tube while it slides in perfectly, and everything is removed and is holding it at the right place.
I think what they wanted to know also was about the some of them are baskets and some of them aren't, and where did they come from? I think you mentioned to me that they were also given to you, like the pieces of yarn. Can
so
you say
actually,
a bit about
some are African baskets, some were from Colombia. So it's like different baskets that I got, and I've had them for some time from, you know, people that thought maybe you can use this. And I've used them in different ways. They were actually kind of like the plexi that you were telling about in the middle of the piece. I've used them up there. But this time I thought, okay, it's perfect because we need something for the vase. And some needed a little bit more work to work with the piece. So some got extra crocheting and knitting on the bottom. And then obviously because of the angles, they had to be adjusted. So I had to add more rope and yarn to them to make them work.
Great. And this might seem like a strange question, but I'm just sort of wondering, do you only knit and crochet in the studio, or do you also do it for like, you know, I'm picturing you in front of the TV watching something and knitting and crocheting. Are you just knitting and crocheting all the time, or only for a piece?
All the time.
All the time.
All the
That's
time.
what I thought.
When I'm crocheting, for example, when I'm crocheting a weight, some of the pieces have this like fishing weights. The only way to crochet the weight is to crochet around the weight. So then I have to like lay in bed, have the weight in my stomach, and crochet around it.
Okay, I have a whole new visual happening. It's great. Somebody wants to know what inspired you originally to make art, and I guess when did you know you were going to be an artist? That's really the question.
I don't know. I think I've been, you know, making something since I can remember. The work evolved, obviously. You know, I think I used to work with more like on the wall, two-dimensional pieces, technological pieces, I guess, microcontrollers that I would sew into fabric, and then everything kind of like started evolving into the tubes, into the totems. But I don't know. I think, you know, there I would have to really side wriggle again, that there's that urge to create, and I think it comes from an urge to create, not from an urge to imitate. So it's not like you set up yourself to like, I'm gonna make art, you know. You're doing something that you have to do. It's kind of like an insane thing, you know. Sometimes I think it's an insane thing. Things are happening around the world and I'm just wrapping thread around a tube, you know.
Yeah, I think that's really great to sort of have to have the need to keep doing something and it's making sense for you. This is what I try to explain, and this sort of leads to my next question, which I always like to ask every artist that we ever speak to. But I brought a group in today into the piece, and I'm wondering if there is anything that you want, and maybe it changes, that you want people to walk away with, either a feeling or a thought or an emotion after they visit your installation or your work, the piece specifically at the Lowe.
No, no, I mean, not really. I'm not set to want the viewer to walk away with something. I love to hear what people feel and think after, after they see the work. But I think part of the work is letting the viewer experience it and get their own take.
Great. I would ask you, Lance, the same question. Is there something in the project space, from the curator point of view, that you want the visitor to leave the museum with, or even just walking by? I don't know. Same question.
It's a good one. Strategically, I selected Alex to inaugurate the space. I think her work brings a sense of playfulness and joy to a very serious part of campus, right? People often walk by a museum and they think it's lightweight or old, historic, so uninteresting. So I really wanted her work to show that it's relevant and it's playful yet serious. For the 5 shows that will follow, each artist was, I feel, strategically selected by me. First of all, I like the artists. I like the people. I can work with them. They're super ambitious. They're hardwired never to stop. They're not daunted by issues such as space and power and budget and time. So that obviously gravitates me to want to work with artists who want to do stuff. But each show, I feel, over the next 2 years is quite a long spread of what Jill has offered us, should evoke a different experience. There are radical shifts between Alex and Wendy, and then Wendy and Sandra. I love the fact that through this opportunity that just sort of fell in our laps, that I'm able, with the Lowe's help, to target and highlight 6 Miami artists who are known and doing really relevant work and who are needing and having this kind of museum opportunity, is sort of why I asked Alex that second question. But each artist is coming from a very, very different place. Most of them are coming with a light-based work, which is something that Jill also likes, so that we could have daytime, nighttime, open, closed viewing for this new project space. And of course, it's coming off the coattails of doing research for Illuminate. So these were many of the artists that we were hopeful of doing public art citywide work. And in fact, Lowe is offering that because it is public art and you don't have to go in, although you'd be crazy not to go in. So for each show, I'm just hoping the artists, through their own vision, aesthetic, philosophy, provides, as I was talking about, an experience. Some are more obvious. There'll be a statement and the work is palpable and readable and understandable, and others, like Alex, are experiential. And that shows the full range of contemporary art, right? So we're never to dictate narrative, we're to inspire a conversation. And so that's the goal over the next few years of rolling out amazing artists that I never knew existed until I started going to studios. I think that's a lesson for local artists, collectors, curators. Like, you need to go and see stuff. And beyond that, you need to have conversations just like this. Like earlier, I said, oh my God, I'm so not into doing webinars. But, because you can see how open Alex is, it's an interesting conversation and you just want to learn more. And I think that's what the project space will do. Everyone will see a work, they'll read a little, they'll hear a webinar, and then hopefully it'll make them thirsty. That's what art does, right? It gets people to think and dream and dig deeper. So I think curatorially, that's my hope.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. And Alex, I'll let you have the last word. And I'm wondering if I'm assuming that you know the other artists that are coming up pretty well, but noticing especially that the first three of you happen to be local women artists. And wondering if you inspire one another, and somebody wanted to know if there were other artists that you follow or are inspired by.
Oh, I love so many Miami artists. It's like it's such a great group of friends.
Mm.
And of course, you know, you're inspired by everything that surrounds you, and artist friends, of course, you know, it inspires you. I respect so much all the artists that Lance has picked for the project room. They're amazing artists, and I'm looking forward to coming to their openings. It's an amazing space that you get to experience from the outside, from the inside. It's almost like installing outdoors without installing outdoors. It's great to see students at interacting with the work, with the installation, with the process, which most people never get to see, you know, the process of installing. They just see everything, it's up like magic. Everything is already up. So I think it's so great that students and anyone that comes to campus gets to see that process of how it goes up, you know, the installation, that whole week of installing and putting the work up. It's been an amazing experience, and I would love for, you know, anyone that hasn't seen the show to come by, because we don't get that many opportunities here in Miami. So I think it's great. Anyone that, you know, reach out to me, and I would love to meet anyone at the space.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. And we went 4 minutes over, so I don't want to take away from anyone's time, but I really appreciate all of your candid answers and your enthusiasm for the project and for your art, and hearing from both of you and your conversation. It's clear that you have a great relationship and respect for one another, and was a wonderful experience. And I want to thank you both sincerely for your time and your hard work on this project. And on behalf of the Lowe Art Museum and Dr. Jill Dupuy, who I know is on and listening, I want to thank her and all the sponsors for this wonderful installation and exhibit. And please do come and visit it if you're local through the end of January. And we hope to see you next week as well for our next virtual talk.